and I stream on Twitch. I work in corporate law in the energy sector, so that's what I do by day. And then by night, I talk on Twitch, chiefly about politics and law, current events, that kind of good thing. And yeah, so definitely check out the channel if you'd like. But we have a lot of fun just talking about all kinds of different ideas and policies. We do call-ins regularly. So I generally find that I don't get most of my audience on Twitch seems to disagree with me most of the time, which is kind of interesting. But we'll see. It's we'll see if that's if we can maintain it. I kind of enjoy it because it's fun that somebody in the chat's always pushing back on something that I'm saying.
All right.
I
So would you consider yourself on the left?
I would say slightly, just because I don't know that anybody who would classify themselves as being on the left would classify me as on the left, but I feel like I've got to be considered left of center if you take all my ideas in total, because, well, I guess it just depends. Like, for example, the one that I typically get the most pushback on in my chat is the idea that we should have open borders and that you should be able to come and go from any country as you like to any country that you like. And of course, even if the rest of the world didn't want to do that, we in the United States could do that unilaterally, and it would be great. I mean, and when I say open borders, I mean, we'd still have a checkpoint that you'd have to go through. You might still have some kind of background check, but ultimately, after you do your paperwork, assuming you're not a violent criminal of some kind, you could live and work in the United States like that. So there wouldn't be any kind of holdup. You wouldn't have to wait, for a long time for approval. And once you're in, I mean, you're in for as long as you, I guess, presumably follow the law. So open borders is something I get a lot of pushback from in my chat. Universal healthcare, I think, is an idea that a lot of people are coming around to, even some Republicans are, although, that one still has its controversy. So that's another position I have. A position that I have that also gets a lot of pushback is, I think, some form of universal basic income would be desirable. And whether it was a UBI along the type proposed by Andrew Yang, which I don't. Have you heard much about Andrew Yang?
Yeah, I follow politics.
Yeah. Okay, right on. I'm always amazed at the degree to which people abroad know more about our politics than a lot of people over here do.
I mean,
Andrew Yang is typically polling at like 3%. I think he's a great, fascinating candidate, but most Americans haven't heard of him yet. So
I mean, he's popular on the internet, right? And the people who are mostly looking at U.S. politics are looking at it through like an internet lens. So yeah, I mean, we might not hear much about candidate like Kamala Harris, even though she's pulling higher, but we do know about Andrew Yang. I guess I do.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually quite interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. Depending on your perspective, it's kind of sad if you were the senator from California, Kamala Harris, that Andrew Yang in at least one poll is beating her in her own state that she, is the senator of. Now, again, it's like 8%, like 7%, but still, it's not ideal.
It's insane
for the state, right?
Yeah.
But so I like him. I like his $1,000 a month, idea. That's his universal basic income plan. But I think it could come in many forms. Milton Friedman, for example, who I think had a lot of good ideas. Not all of them were good, but a lot of them were good, I think. He proposed some form of a negative income tax. Now, his idea was that it would replace all government benefits. It would be like much higher than $1,000 a month, but I think you can envision the same kind of policy working out reasonably well if it replaced certain benefits and was just smaller. So yeah, I like that though as a program of poverty alleviation rather than targeted programs that you basically have to use for whatever purpose the government says you have to use them for. I feel like just giving people cash directly as a form of poverty alleviation is a good way to say, all right, look, we trust you as an individual to make the decisions that will benefit you the most in your own life. So, here you go. If we've decided as a government it's our role to alleviate poverty, that's a good way to do it. But that gets a lot of pushback. We had a debate with a conservative lawyer on Twitch here by the name of Lecture Fan, who definitely is worth checking out. And he brought up a lot of points against it, namely just that it would be a lot of new government spending, and that you would have a lot of people abusing the program, spending money on things like drink and drugs. And of course, that's there have been studies that have disproven that idea. But at the same time, if you're being asked to pay for a new program, I understand the skepticism. So that's one. Let's see. So those are kind of three big ideas that I feel like put me left of center.
Yes,
Other
I'm
ideas,
hearing a lot
yeah,
of I guess leftist ideas.
yeah.
So maybe make it a bit interesting. So
Mhm.
what do you think that is an idea that you hold that isn't a left
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah. Sure. So I think the big thing is that none of the ideas that I, apart from maybe some form of universal health care, really impinge upon capitalism. And I think that ideas that tend to impinge upon capitalism are tend to be, not always, but tend to be bad. Because I think generally my idea of social welfare is, and I think this is a big distinction, um, among folks on the left. This is one reason why I feel like, again, on the internet, I don't know that I'd qualify as on the left, but in real life, I think I would. But on the internet, I don't know, because a lot of the programs I've proposed basically soften the edges of capitalism and make it, I think they make it better in my point of view. Some people would say they make it more tolerable. And I guess you could go back to Marx, who I've been reading a little bit of Marx lately to try and get more understanding about him. And I think it's safe to say he was not a fan of the Social Democrats in large part because their programs kind of preserve capitalism in a way by making it more tolerable, by making it better, right? Whereas but they don't. They by doing that, you don't, you never really open the door to replacing it. Now, I don't want to replace it because I think it's a great engine for generating wealth, and because I believe that individual freedom is kind of my highest value. I don't think that can go on forever. I think we have to have some reasonable limits to it, but that's my value, and I think that if we want to alleviate poverty and misery, the best way to do it is to take the cream off the top of this enormously productive economic engine and then redistribute it a bit. So,
Do you think that I guess you make sort of a distinction between online and
mhm.
offline left.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that the left is necessarily anti-capitalist in some kind of way? Um,
Well, my distinction may not be fair to make. I mean, I'm still relatively new to paying a lot of attention to people, I guess, on the left side of the spectrum. For example, I used to think that somebody like President Obama was a liberal, and that's a left politician right there. But by the standards of today, President Obama might. I mean, you may have heard about this. The other day, he said something to the effect of, "Well, folks, think about the kind of policies that can reform and well, let me find his quote because this got a lot of people
oh
upset.
yeah, yeah, I know the quote. I think.
I want to get this just so I can
Yeah,
I can be saying this right. Let's just see here. I appreciate your patience here.
it's all good.
Um, yeah. Okay. So Twitter reacts to Obama cautioning. Okay. Former President Obama warned the Democratic field of White House hopefuls not to veer too far to the left, a move he said would alienate many who would otherwise be open to voting for the party's nominee this year. And he said, the average American doesn't think we have to completely tear down the system and remake it, and I think it's important for a lot of us not to lose sight of that. There are a lot of persuadable voters out there, and there are a lot of Democrats who just want to see things make sense. They don't want to see crazy stuff. They want to see things a little more fair. They want to see things a little more just, and how we approach that, I think, will be important. So to me, I think that's an important perspective. But that is, he got a lot of pushback for that. Um, so as far as I think I've lost sight of your original question here, but
So I guess
I
I'm
apologize
trying to
there.
sort of needle into or try to, I guess,
Sure.
make sure I understand why you wouldn't consider yourself on the left. Because, I mean,
Oh, yes.
or I mean, not necessarily on the left, I guess, because you did
Yeah.
say that you do consider yourself slightly on the left.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think it's the capitalism thing ultimately. I mean, it seems like a lot of folks now have just on the left have basically decided capitalism as a whole needs to be one way or another done away with, and I am not of that opinion at all. I am for softening some of the edges, but I don't have a problem with capitalism. I guess I have a problem with poverty, and to the extent we can ameliorate poverty, but nevertheless preserve, I think, the the efficient, productive, freedom-oriented nature of the free
Hmm.
market, I think that would be great. So,
I mean, I personally think if I guess especially if you look in a global scale, I don't think that leftism is sort of anti-capitalist inherently.
yeah.
I think especially in a country like Denmark, the
Hmm.
biggest leftist, almost all the biggest leftist parties are capitalist. They're social democrats. They're not for necessarily socialism. Um, I mean, granted, it's a very different world. We do have a lot of
Hmm.
nationalized industries already, so
Hmm.
pushing further than that perhaps
Yeah.
discourages people. But I think, especially in the U.S., I mean, you would fall easily on the left. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
did you ever vote Republican?
The last seat, let's see, I voted Republican in 2008.
Hmm.
And that was the last time I voted Republican. So let's see, one, two, three, four, I guess the 5 cycles since then. Since we have them every 2 years, I voted, I think, probably straight Democrat. There may have been some exception, but I can't really think of one. So I'm pretty sure I voted straight Democrat since that time. And, I remember I voted for John McCain. Thought that was the last Republican I remember voting for. I thought he had just kind of a better sense of foreign policy. I thought that was really important. But in retrospect, I would probably change my vote if I could. So, I mean, he was. I wouldn't. I don't feel like some kind of shame for voting for him. I think he was a
No.
good man. I think he meant well. I think that was a different degree of Republican than we've, a different kind of Republican than we've got, in the White House now. But that's the last Republican I can remember voting for. So,
I think for most U.S. presidents, it's really hard to understand the scale of sort of their
hmm
mark before they're done. I
yeah,
mean, especially I
yeah,
mean, if you just look at Obama as well. I mean,
hmm
when he got elected, a lot of especially really progressive people were quite happy about it. But now, if you ask them, I mean, with the I guess drone strikes get brought up a lot and stuff. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
it's
That's
hard.
that's a that's another issue that I feel like probably puts me more left of center is that I feel like the war on terrorism has been, especially in the last 10 years, has been a real problem. The drone, like the fact that we've engaged in blowing up so many weddings overseas, the fact that we're engaged in Yemen, the degree, I mean, right up to, I feel like then cleaning up the mess that I think it's, arguably fair to say that we created with ISIS was probably the right decision. But then to abandon the Kurds to the Turks, another disaster. So I think I'm still thinking through consistent foreign policy. I don't think the United States should engage in isolationism. I think its role in the world in multilateral institutions is really important and has been probably a net positive. But when it goes it alone and engages in a lot of the activities it's engaged in on its own, I think it's been arguably more harmful than not. I mean, I hate to be so wishy-washy on it because I'm still thinking through some of that, but um, I at the moment, for example, I feel like the Iraq War was an unmitigated disaster, and I'm actually going to have a discussion with somebody later this week who may be listening right now about that very issue. Maybe he'll change my mind. We're going to have a discussion about foreign policy from the Bush administration years. But yeah, I mean, on the whole, that's kind of a difficult position because I don't like a lot of what the United States has done overseas, but I don't think the United States should just, retreat from the world because I think if it did, then you'd get some of what has already happened in Syria, where the Russians have filled the void, and where I think arguably, I don't think it's arguable. I think the Russians taking power in different parts of the world is more harmful than the United States having influence in different parts of the world. And I guess over the next century, the Chinese may very well, do the same kind of adventurism overseas too if we're not involved around the world. So I think America has to be engaged. And I think that engagement can be good. But I think some of the engagement of the last 10, 20 years has been really bad. So
What do you think
I
about
think that's difficult to classify.
what do you think about
Sure.
NATO and
Hmm.
I guess
Yes.
stuff like that.
I am a big fan of NATO. In fact, let me see if I. Oh, just a sec. Okay. Yeah, right here. I'm gonna swap out the flag pin to prove my devotion to the North Atlantic Treaty.
I'm ready for it.
Organization here. This was the Hong Kong flag pin. I'm thinking about doing a fundraiser for either Hong Kong or the Kurds.
That's cool.
But it's. I'm not sure though how I could send money to Hong Kong or to Hong Kong protesters.
I'm sure there's like a charity organization somewhere.
I've been looking, and if anybody has any ideas, first, but I haven't been able to find anything. We found a Syrian Kurdish relief fund. Syria, I think the Kurdish Red Cross, Red Crescent. But anyway, yeah. So big fan of NATO. I think that some people say its purpose has been served and it no longer has a purpose. But I mean, ultimately, Russia is involved in trying to subvert elections, not just in the United States, but all over Europe. I've heard that, at least this is what I've heard from people in Europe, is that Russia has been involved in elections there as well, and that nationalist parties in Europe are often Russian-backed, and that I mean, ultimately, I think that it's Russia is weaker than it was back when it was the core component of the Soviet Union, right? But it is still a threat to its neighbors. It still has thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons. And it would still be a great power with military involvement abroad if it could be. Now, today, it's kind of comical when they haul out one of their one aircraft carrier that breaks down, right? I don't know if you've heard about this. They've got one aircraft carrier, and it's accommodated at all times by a tugboat because this thing breaks down, I think about half the time on half of its trips, So it's a pitiful state on one hand, but nevertheless, I mean, they're still much more powerful than all their neighbors. And I have no doubt they would have already, if the Baltic states were not members of NATO, tried to do the same things that they've done in Ukraine, in Georgia. And I think it's important to contain them. I wish there was a way to expand NATO and to make it kind of a global sort of alliance of democracies, so that you could have other democracies that don't have territorial issues, because you can't have a member with ongoing territorial disputes in NATO. But a country like Japan, like South Korea, Australia. I sometimes mention New Zealand, although somebody from New Zealand told me that would never happen because we have nuclear weapons and New Zealand is nuclear weapon free. But I mean, we're already allied with New Zealand, so some kind of like global alliance, because I think the value of deterrence is really important. I mean, if we never have a war, that's a win. Right? I mean, if we never have a war because we have credible deterrence, that's great, because, I mean, apart from all the lives you lose in a war, apart from all the destruction and, all the destruction, I think that the other thing you get from great wars in the 20th century, at least, was like serious political extremism. As far as I can tell, as bad as Imperial Russia and Imperial Germany were, the fascists and the communists that replaced them were like even worse, and they would have never had a chance at power if not for World War I. So I think kind of NATO has helped make great power war like obsolete, just like nuclear weapons have, and in that sense, I think they're really worthwhile and worth protecting. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, again, and I use him as kind of my metric for like the most leftward political candidate right now in the Democratic Party. He says, I don't want to expand NATO, but I want to preserve it. I think it has an important role. So, I think it's worthwhile. And to those who say its mission has been concluded, I would disagree.
What do you think about Trump's comments on NATO and pulling back?
Yeah, I that tends to be my first and foremost reason that I want him not to be president anymore, because that basically to me says, let's undo 70 years of foreign policy success, right? I mean, we basically managed to turn Germany, a country we went to war with twice, into an ally, into a colleague among nations rather than a perennial adversary. And I mean, part of that success is because we bound them together with us through a military alliance. And he'll say things like, well, NATO isn't contributing their fair share, guys. All these countries need to be providing 2% of their GDP. And I don't know what Denmark provides. I don't think it's 2%,
no, it's less.
But at the end of the day, I think he's missing the point. The point is, one, whatever strength they're providing more strength to us than we'd have on our own. So that's one point. And then point two is, it also ensures, I guess there's one less, it ensures one that we've got strength, so more strength overall, right? And to that extent, we can spend a little less than we probably otherwise would have to on our own. And it also ensures that these countries of Europe are on our side rather than in some kind of, independent neutral power block maybe, or something like that. So, I mean, I guess in a real politics sense, if you have Germany on your side, if you have all the countries of the NATO alliance on your side, then they're not bound to anybody else either. So that's a plus. And to say, well, we're paying too many billions, you're missing the point. Like, it's not just a dollars and cents calculation. I mean, the amount of money that the United States saves by virtue of having this Western alliance on our side is probably incalculable. Compared to, the paltry amounts of money that we pay extra in our defense budget because maybe, Denmark is at 1.2% instead of 2 or whatever figure it is. Because I think they're all like still relatively close. I don't think anybody is like, so
they're all around the 2%.
Yeah. So it's just frustrating. I think that's to me, the easiest policy that he could fix, or that he could stop being so bad on. But of course, that policy has been baked into his brain for now decades. He was talking about NATO taking advantage of us back in the 80s, back when the Soviet Union was still around. So it's just, that's just his big idea.
It's actually really interesting. This sort of paying your fair share to NATO. I think I don't know how it is in many other countries, but in Denmark, that's sort of like a right-wing talking point as well for like some of the parties. There are some parties who actually argue that we should pay our fair share, like move it up to 2%.
Sure. I mean, I think that would be ideal. I think it absolutely would be ideal to set a commitment that everybody makes, gets to, and then, because the countries, the other countries of NATO definitely do benefit from it. I mean, at the end of the day, I know that the big strength of the military guarantee is that any country that's attacked can call on the United States too, among all its other allies, and call on the United States. So yeah, that would be ideal, but it's not such a big point that I would say threaten the that I would call into question Article 5, the collective defense clause, and say, well, maybe we won't defend you, because he's done that before. I mean, he's hinted at it in his traditional Trump fashion, where he's like, well, maybe why are we defending Montenegro anyway? What's that about? Well, that's that's if you can credibly undermine Article 5, then the whole project means nothing, and the Russians at that point decide they want to attack Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania or whatever, and that's if it's not credible, then it doesn't work, right? Then deterrence doesn't work, and that's why I think that his constant needling of our NATO allies, questioning of the viability of the alliance, that's all bad, and so I'd say that's the first and foremost reason he needs to go, simply because that's something that the next president, if somebody left the alliance, I don't think they just join up just because well, we've got a new president. No, I mean, they'll regard us as an untrustworthy ally forever. So at least for a very long time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Trump has sort of a track record of sort of pulling the U.S. out of stuff like the climate deal, the tariffs. It's not something, I guess, unprecedented.
Oh yeah, no, it's not, and I mean, it's just that I know that a lot of people say he's standing up for the American taxpayer. Some folks in the chat are saying that too, and I get that. It's just that, on balance, the value that we get from it is just far and away beyond what we are paying. And it's the same, I think, with those other deals. The TPP was another one, Trans-Pacific Partnership, that he withdrew from. Hillary Clinton claimed she would have done the same thing. I kind of doubt that she would have. But, she claimed she would have also withdrawn from the TPP. And and then, of course, the Paris Agreement, too, which the United States worked hard on negotiating, I believe. And, then after that, we just left. which to a certain degree, some of this stuff is fixable because, as somebody in my chat just pointed out, look, we break agreements a lot, and that is true. That is kind of a luxury you can have when you're a big power who people have to deal with. But that only goes so far. That's not something you can rely on forever.
Yeah, and the other countries need the U.S. as well. It's not as simple as just we can just ignore the U.S. because we don't like them now.
Yeah. That's probably another point. Actually, somebody in chat mentioned something else that I think would probably put me on. This would put me off the left, although increasingly it would put me off the right too. Which is to say, somebody said, withdrawing from TPP was a top move. It would have messed up the lives of many Americans. And that is to say that America should be much more skeptical of free trade and free trade deals. And that is something I'm very much against. I think the consensus on free trade is right up there with the consensus on climate change, that it's a good thing for the economy of a country overall. There are some people that lose out. As a result, the government should set up programs so that those who directly lose out, the small minority of Americans who lose out because of a trade deal should just, we should just give them cash or something. Some kind of payment of money so that they can, pick themselves up and do something else with their lives. But the fact that most of the population benefits, that's it. That plus the fact that you ought to be able to freely buy and sell as you see fit. More often than not, at least. So that's something I don't know where that puts me politically. Free trade has become kind of toxic on the left and the right now.
Yeah, exactly that. I don't think free trade is sort of like an anti-left idea. I think specifically in terms of free trade, I think people start to question free trade when they become more protectionist overall, and I think that's sort of something that just happens when a country is in distress of some kind, and that can be both right wing, left wing.
It's a difficult issue because it's one of those things where the benefits accrue to everybody and less tangible maybe than the harms that accrue to a small number of people when the factory closes down and leaves town, and that town maybe only had that one factory, and so they're in a real rough place. But at the end of the day, the economic consensus that free trade works for the entire population is very strong, and there's just got to be a way that, and people have talked about other elements of the TPP, like, for example, the idea that it would reduce national sovereignty by allowing companies to arbitrate against rules and regulations in different countries. But at the same time, I remember there was a study done about these kinds of cases. Hold on a second. I'm going to check my microphone here.
Sure.
Yeah, I think
you just switched something.
Hold on a sec here. Yeah, let me just play with my microphone settings here for a bit.
That's good. It's fine. You did cut out sometimes, like very slightly.
Yeah. Just I'm not sure what is up here. Yeah, not sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it's fine here.
Okay. Yeah, sorry folks, I'm not sure what's up with the microphone here, but I'll try and get closer to it. Let's see. Microphone.
Is it my microphone?
Properties. No, I don't think it is, because when I turned it off, let me just try and turn my microphone off for 1 second. And then if you could keep talking and let me know. Yeah, I don't know. It must be mine. I'm not sure. Anywho, we'll just keep on. So anyway, it just free trade, the benefits. There are no free trade deals where the majority of the population has lost out. And so rather than just kind of give into protectionism, which always, again, favors large corporations over small corporations, concentrations of wealth over new and smaller businesses. There's just no defense for it, apart from the occasional limited, I feel like often overused argument of national security, Yeah. So anyway, so like I was saying, I'm not sure where that one goes, but that's one that I feel pretty strongly about.
Sure. Okay, so let's change the topic for a little bit.
Sure.
This question might seem like a fun question at face value, but I think it's actually an important one.
Okay.
So your clothes, and
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
flag in the background, and sort of like
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
demeanor and
Sure.
stuff. I guess
Oh yeah.
you could call it your branding, your appearance, your.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
I think that's something that's sort of at the core of
Mm-hmm.
diversity of tactics, actually, because I think you appeal to some people that I don't think, like, I think almost no one else would be able to reach with like some of your
Yeah.
politics. And I'm just curious,
Mm-hmm.
how much of that is sort of like thought through, like how much did
Mm-hmm.
you plan?
Well, I will say that it's not intentional that I don't have a flag up because I'm trying to appeal to people. I have a flag up because I like the flag.
Hmm.
And I will say though that I've thought about it. I do think that it does appeal to a lot of folks out there, and I think that to the extent it does, and to the extent that folks maybe left of center don't like the American flag or don't. Again, this is American, of course, but maybe this applies in other countries. Maybe not. Can only speak to the American experience here. I think, in fact, I think it's probably a very uniquely American thing because we don't really have much in the way of a shared culture. Like we don't have a shared ethnicity, really, any like shared religion. I mean, some people would say that we used to be a very Christian country, but even back then, the Christianity was divided into several different denominations. So I don't think we have much of the common ethnic, religious, cultural background that, say, a lot of European countries might. But we do have civic nationalism. And I think that civic nationalism is an important way to appeal to people who, especially people who don't agree with you. Because if you can't draw some kind of basic commonality with them, I don't know how you can ever try and persuade them of anything. Like it's difficult because it opens you up to, like, I don't know if you've seen that fella Hassan on Twitch.
Yeah.
And, he uses the Soviet symbols on his channel and all that. And we were on a podcast together one time, and I called him out on that. I said, you're using these symbols of murder and death. And he was saying, well, you're using the American flag. It's just as bad, right? And on the one hand, it kind of took me by surprise because, of course, I wasn't expecting. But in retrospect, of course, I should have, because once you say, well, any kind of crimes by the state are bad, then I guess you get to the inevitable conclusion of, well, all states are bad because all states have engaged in some kind of crimes, right? Now, it's probably been a long time since Denmark engaged in kind of crimes overseas, as far as I know.
We're mostly getting attacked.
But but most countries, if you go back not too far, have some blood on their flags, right? And I think, though, at the same time, we live in a world of, right? And states are more than just, tools of organized violence and theft. I mean, there are real differences in systems of law between states, right? And so to me, the United States represents a government that guarantees some basic fundamental rights that I think allow for that system to be continually improved. And to me, that is something very much worth defending and talking about, because I think it provides a common frame of reference, some set of common values to appeal to that maybe make it so you can persuade somebody who's at least on the fence, maybe even on the other side of the fence, to come around to your point of view, or to at least hear it out. And I think that's very important. Whereas somebody who I think is using, who is either hostile to, say, the American flag or to American symbols, they're probably just turning a whole lot of people off by default. So somebody in the chat just asked me, how about a NATO flag? That's a good idea. I think I'll order that. I think I'll order that after this call. But yeah, so I think it's important. It wasn't really intentional. Like, I didn't really, go into it. I've always had a flag, like, at work. And I think it started just because I have always been probably more patriotic than maybe a little more patriotic than baseline. I don't know, but I also think they're pretty. Like I like my little flag. Yeah, little flag bouquet, right? It's good for memes too. Like when somebody comes out, during I think the Big Brain podcast, which I don't know if you've seen it before. A couple of people were fighting about free speech, and I just reached for one of the flags and I just said, "Only in America, only in America." Do you have this? So it's good for memes too. But so it's not intentional, but now I can see certainly that there's some value. Although again, maybe not, because some people again see that and they're like, "Oh, I know who this guy is. Screw him." So it just depends, But
yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely gonna put some people off just at face value. I mean, especially like people. I mean, I did as well. I'm not gonna lie. When I first saw you, I assumed you were like a staunch conservative. Almost look like a Fox News host, something like that.
Hey, Fox. Say what you will about Fox News, right? And there's plenty to say about it, but I believe it's also the most popular network on cable television, right?
Yeah, it is.
And there's that. So that's not to say you have to adopt the malicious tactics of it, but it might not be the death of you to, as somebody in the United States trying to appeal to Americans, to wave a flag now and then to show a sense of, hey, here's a symbol we have in common or whatever. And to that end, the suit. I started wearing the suit, one, because I figured, well, this is something I wear for work, not every day, but a lot of times, so that's one thing. And then, I'm trying to play up the lawyer thing. You'd typically imagine a lawyer in a suit. And I also thought it would be kind of a fun gimmick, hey, this is somebody who looks kind of different, right? Let's give this guy a click. And it definitely worked. Like one of our earliest raids back when we were a channel with like 10 viewers was from somebody who just scrolled down, and I saw how it worked because she recorded, I watched the VOD afterward when she was searching for somebody to raid. And she just scrolled down hundreds and hundreds, of windows, and then stopped and was like, "Oh, there's a suit. How about that?" So that's fun.
I mean, I really think. I mean, it's interesting and it's different, and I think it's a good idea. I mean, just even from like a business perspective, I mean, I think it works for you.
Yeah, but it is frustrating that that I've heard more than once somebody say, "Well, that's what Nick Fuentes does. He's got an American flag and a suit." And it's just like, if you have to concede wearing and waving the flag of the country to neo-Nazis, I mean,
even
there's no reason we have to concede that to those folks,
Even if you do that, I mean, if instead of watching Nick Fuentes, they watch you, I mean, I'd be more than happy about that.
That'd be something. Yeah. So yeah, that's the story with that. And the flag pins, I just I used to have different ones, but I started getting a bunch of them because I thought that would be a fun meme.
Right. Yeah. So I guess in general, are you interested in changing people's behavior? Is that something that you value, or are you just, I guess, trying to be entertaining?
Well, I guess probably the first and foremost is to entertain folks, because if they're not interested in it, they're probably not going to listen, right? Now, that being said, I do like to think that if I don't know if we're persuading anybody yet. I mean, I've only been doing this for 3 months, and I've only been doing it with an audience beyond a handful of people for 2 months, and so it's I think the jury's still out on whether this is persuasive. But I do think that a lot of different folks are at least listening. And I do think that, over time we'll see. I mean, I've had a lot of folks at least interested in, sorry, folks in the chat are kind of cursing up a storm right now. I'm not sure why. Folks have at least been interested in the ideas. Like, for example, when I started talking about open borders, people would just laugh that out. It's never going to work. That's a terrible idea. Now, occasionally, when I'll talk about the idea, somebody in the chat will say, "Yes, I'm so excited about that. Nobody talks about that. I'm really glad to hear about that." So just as one example, I think slowly but surely we might change a few minds, So,
I mean,
and I think that would be great. If only, like, my goal is to promote like liberal democracy as a value in and of itself, as a framework for like solving problems in society, as opposed to revolutionary politics. Um, on the left, I mean, also on the right, although I don't know that you could call it revolutionary. I guess kind of reactionary ideas. There's this great poster that let me see if I can find here on the neoliberal forum on Reddit, and I'm gonna paste a link to it in chat. I just love it so much. I really want to provide a link to it, because this just really represents my thinking as far as like my goals in trying to promote liberal democracy. So right there, check it out. But yeah, there's the link in the chat, folks. So sorry about the interference here on the microphone, folks. I'm not sure how to fix it without like probably screwing around with the call. So we'll just keep on going.
I mean, we could try to restart the call real quick. I don't know if it's
yeah.
I mean, do you want to just?
No, that's all right. That's all right. It's all right.
All right. So let's get into lawyering a little bit.
Sure.
So what initially made you want to be like a lawyer on Twitch?
Well, the lawyer on Twitch part was just to differentiate myself with. I mean, it's we really talk about law relatively less often. You know what I mean? Normally, we've done it a few times. Like, I'll go over a legal case with somebody, now and then. But normally, people aren't as interested in that as they are in saying, "What do you think about this? What do you think about that?" So on and so forth, And so, as far as that, I think I mention it like on the tag for all my streams, just to kind of interest people in what I'm doing. So there's that. And then I think being a lawyer does, with just thinking about some issues. Like, one of the things that's come up a lot recently is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act here in the United States. Basically, I'm not sure what the laws on this stuff are abroad, but in the United States, there's a Section 230 of the CDA, which says, one, that you're not liable for the material posted on your platform by a third party. So if you're Twitch and I say something reprehensible, Twitch is not responsible for it. And in fact, Twitch is also free to ban me and moderate my, right? And so that's Section 230. It says, one, they're not liable, and two, they can ban me and moderate my content if they want. And that's like super important, because that law basically says you can manage a thriving online community. Recently, though, a lot of folks on the right started this, but I think folks on the left are kind of taking interest in it as well, in the idea of repealing or at least modifying this rule so that platforms like Facebook and Google, and I guess really including Twitch, I mean, Twitch is probably small potatoes to them, can be moderated more effectively by the government, which would set rules maybe for how a platform would be moderated. I don't really know that folks have provided much in the way of concrete alternatives, but just the idea of having more state intervention in these markets, treating platforms as publishers who can be held liable for what people post on them, and that, I think that is that's something we talk about a lot, and it helps to have a little bit of legal background to be able to talk about this stuff. So it helps a little bit, but ultimately, I didn't go into law with the intention of going. Doing anything on Twitch, but Twitch is fun because you can do it after work. So it's a good place to just kind of chill out and chat with folks.
Would you ever want to go full time on Twitch, or is that sort of like a hobby thing?
I don't know that I'd ever drop the lawyer stuff completely, but I could see doing Twitch to some degree full time. We'd have to be doing a lot better, I think, though, to do that. And I mean, I know the channel's still relatively new. But if we could really push growth, ahead somehow, I'd be open to that. But that's probably a long way off, So something to think about, though. It's a nice dream, So.
Right. So actually, I wanted to give you a chance to talk a bit about law.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I actually looked up a few things and talked to a lawyer friend of mine.
Oh, cool.
So I guess first off, do you think there's a connection between being a lawyer and conservatism in general? Is that something
Yeah.
you've ever faced?
Yeah, I think there's probably something to that. For example, I wouldn't say overall the lawyers are conservative, like politically. I think it probably depends on specialty. For example, plaintiffs' lawyers, that is to say, lawyers who um, engage in suing people, after an injury. Those lawyers tend to be Democrats because Democrats. I don't know what the background is for this, but those kind of attorneys tend to have. Um, uh, they just tend to be bigger supporters of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party tends to be bigger supporters of their causes, namely making it easier to sue people and collect damages. Right? Republicans, on the other hand, have a long history of being they're more for the defense in tort cases. So they want to make it harder to collect lots of money in lawsuits. They want to ultimately make it. They want to make it. Let's see what I say. Like they, for example, want to put caps on injury damages. So instead of saying, well, you can collect as much in a lawsuit as it is that you're entitled to, they would say, well, you can collect as much up to, say, $100,000. And we've decided anything above that is probably, just some kind of scam. And they'll occasionally wave the bloody shirt of a really large jury verdict is worth several $1,000,000 and say, this is an out of control jury. We need to restrict law. What I think folks like that misunderstand is that cases like that are basically a small government way of regulating behavior and promoting public safety, as opposed to having an organization in place that says, well, you must do X, Y, and Z, to in order to be a safest, So ultimately these problems are addressed one way or another. They're addressed either through courts or through regulatory agencies. But so that's kind of an example of a political difference in terms of between lawyers, just based on their background, right? What do they do? Now, I work in fossil fuels, which some people would say is very conservative. Understandably enough, probably most attorneys in the energy business are conservative, I'd guess. But as far as does law make you more conservative in your mindset? I'd say it probably does, because and again, this is a kind of conservatism, I think, beyond Republican, or conservative party or whatever. I mean conservatism in the sense of saying, well, I don't like revolutionary change generally, because the law is a gradually thing, at least in Western democracy, right? I'm not an expert on civil law like they have in Denmark, but under the English common law system, it's a very slowly evolving, gradually evolving system. And so you have one case, another case, and another case that all kind of are logically consistent in some form or another, and that establishes a long-held legal principle. And arguing against that principle is pretty rare. It generally stays in place. Not all the time, of course, but so I think basically the way that in the United States and other English common law systems work, this tradition of precedent and established common law probably makes you more conservative, because you have a view toward, we don't want to make any kind of hasty decisions, folks. Instead, let's reach into the past to demonstrate why I am correct in the present. You know what I mean? So rather than saying this decision is right because it's the right thing to do now, you would say, well, this decision is right because basically it's always been right. It's always been the case that our law supports this conclusion. You know what I mean? So it's stable but not static. Somebody in the chat. So I think law in that sense probably makes you more conservative in mindset. Not everybody, of course, but I'd say that's a good way to think about it. Long-winded answer. I can talk.
That's completely fine. I mean, I got all the time.
Sure.
So do you think there's a distinction there between, I guess, the concepts of natural versus positive law?
Oh, now I don't know much about all.
Okay.
I wish I did. I tend to be of the opinion our rights. I like the idea that our rights come I mean, I'm not religious in any way, but I like that idea kind of, just because it suggests that there is a law, there are rights that transcend time and space, and just because, maybe the First Amendment is abolished, that doesn't mean that it was legitimate to abolish it. That right to free speech exists somehow beyond time and space. I mean, I don't generally buy into that much. I think that our rights are, there are some rights that I can see that being clearer on, like maybe, if the government ever tried to say you need to have a license to have children, for example, that would be a serious infringement of, like, a right that you have, like, by existence, to just reproduce, to fulfill, like, your ultimately biological, like you're one of a handful of biologically hardwired imperatives, right? But on the whole, I just the idea of natural law to me seems like a good way to argue against government policy that may be constitutional, but that you just don't like.
Yeah.
So, not a big, and I'm not really sure what. So again, if that reveals me to be a legal fraud, I apologize. But what is positive law?
I think positive law is, as I understand it, is when you sort of, I guess, the opposite of natural law. So the thought that a law is to be made by whoever is in charge. At the time.
Yeah. Okay. And, yeah, in that sense, I'm probably a positivist. In the sense that I think that the law is what the law is, and I guess what you can logically draw from it. So if you repealed the First Amendment and you replaced it with some kind of European style right to free speech, that would be, and I say European style, I'm not sure what it is in every country, but generally you can enforce a hate speech law. You can't do that in the United States. The First Amendment does not permit that. You could, if you peeled that First Amendment, placed it with style free speech law, then ultimately that would be the law, right? That would be the new free speech in the United States.
You're cutting out
now
so much right now. Can you?
Yeah, let me see what we can do here. Let me see what we can do. I'm gonna let's see if I can do like low latency here.
Or
maybe that'll
put down the threshold to nothing or something. I don't
know. Yeah. Sorry about this, folks. Unfortunately, I live in an area served by an internet, and so we get very bad service. So latency. Okay, so we're going to go with normal latency, I guess. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay. All right, so hopefully that helps.
Let's try.
Not sure.
Sure. Okay, so I guess sort of a similar question. Where do you stand on punitive versus rehabilitative justice? Is that something you think about?
Yeah, I don't believe in punitive. Yeah, no, I don't. And by the way, this gets so bad that you like want to stop, do it again another time. That's totally okay.
It's fine.
Totally understand. I have no interest in punitive justice. I don't see any value in the state, like punishing just for the sake of punishing. I think that the state should be given like as much power to punish people as it needs to basically keep them from hurting other people. And then we should try to rehabilitate if we can. And if we can't, then, just lock up in conditions that are reasonable. But I think that, like, I don't like the death penalty at all. I don't place any value on, like, the right of the family to see the person executed. Because our whole system of law is based on the idea that crimes committed are crimes committed like against the whole state, the whole people, And so the idea that, we should execute people because it will make some people feel better, that's an irrelevant interest to me. I think that's absolutely irrelevant. Especially when we think about the fact that so many executions in the United States, when I say so many, I mean, it's not the majority. A not insignificant minority of executions are of innocent prisoners. People who are later cleared, or and like in Florida, for example, 1 out of 4 death penalty verdicts results in an exoneration, right? So either a serious fatal flaw at trial or innocence. And it's just, rather than do that, just lock people up if need be forever. But rather than trying to engage in retributive, in punitive justice, which I just don't know who that helps. I mean, I think it makes some people feel good, but I don't think that's a justification for giving the state the power to to grind people into dust. Because again, that power never stops. You can't just confine it to the prison cell. So I just don't I don't believe in it, and I don't think it really persuades many people either. So yeah, I mean I don't think it deters from committing crimes. I think probably most crimes are committed either for reasons of poverty or for reasons of mental illness, and there probably are a handful of crimes that are committed out of some kind of knowing, just callous behavior, but I don't think that punitive justice is going to stop too many folks, because we've already tried it in the United States, right? I mean, we've already tried draconian sentencing and punishments, and
there's been studies
that didn't reduce crime. Yeah. I mean, some people would say, I'm not sure if I'm sold on this, but some people would say that actual abortion rights are what reduce the crime rates in the United States. And that's a pretty controversial theory. I'm not saying I necessarily support that. But some people would say that, the big drop in crime rates in the United States came after about 18 to 20 years after the 1970s, when we had the Roe v. Wade decision in the United States and abortions became, commonplace. So there are a lot of theories for that, but I've never heard anybody say, it was punitive sentencing that reduced crime. I don't think so.
All right. So protected classes, how do you feel about them?
Yeah, I think if we didn't have any, right? Like at some point in the future.
Can you repeat?
But I think, sure. I think it would be ideal if some point in the future we didn't have like this idea of protected classes, but I don't think we're there yet. Maybe sometime later in the century we could say, all right, we really don't need like protected classes for, everybody can be individual in America, but we're certainly not there yet. And I think that, again, given the way that the government was in direct oppression of racial minorities and religious minorities, particularly racial minorities. I think our history on religion is a lot better than our history on race, but especially racial minorities, where the states would pass just the most onerous laws restricting the behavior and the rights of Black Americans and other minorities too. I think it's reasonable for the government to say, hey, the legacy of is such that the government should provide some kind of protections to these people in employment, in housing, and in a few other special areas, right? And I think those protections should be extended to gay and lesbian Americans, trans people, and so on and so forth. So I think it would be it's very reasonable to exceptions too. Some people think that means, for example, then okay, well. So does that mean if I misgender somebody or I use the wrong pronoun that I should be locked up? No, but it does mean, I suppose, that if your boss routinely tried to do that to you at work, that they might be in some kind of legal trouble if they were trying to do it in a way that was harassing you, as opposed to maybe making a mistake sometime. So, I think protected classes are a good idea right now, given our history, which is still relatively recent. I mean, the idea of real tangible legal equality between the races is like a few decades, right? I mean, it wasn't meaningful in the 1960s, and it's been a long struggle to make it a real tangible thing. So I think we're certainly making progress there, and maybe at some point in the future, protected classes could be abolished because, in a sense they are. And they are themselves, and I think it's important to remember this, a kind of infringement on people's freedom, say, of free association, right? I mean, if you can't literally fire and hire who you want, have whoever you want living on your property, that is a kind of infringement on your rights. excuse me, but given the history of this country, I think it's very reasonable for government to try and ameliorate those issues through the idea of protecting classes. And I don't know. I don't have an idea for when it should end. But that's a long time out. Affirmative action. There was a case called. That's another example of like protected classes in action, right? And we talked about this the other night on the street. Let's see. There was a case in front of the United States Supreme Court called Grutter V Bollinger in 2003. If anybody wants to post a link to that in chat, maybe I can a little later. I can't right now because literally anything else I do on the tank are. Sorry about the way. I appreciate your patience. But this case said that affirmative action right now, basically as I described, is constitutional. Maybe, though, in 25 years, it won't be any, because we will have made substantial racial progress, and at that point, it won't be reasonable for the government to distinguish. So, something to think about there. I think that means that in 2028, affirmative action may not be constitutional, but for now, certainly is.
So, just if I understood it correctly, so you would be for adding protections for example, gender.
Yes. Yeah. To the extent we already have them for so I wouldn't. I'm not sure if anybody's proposed any. I'm not aware of what those would be. But to the extent we have them for race in this country, exactly. I think it's reasonable to have them for, basically another type of minority.
Sure. So I guess getting into a little bit about trans rights, because I think that's also like a popular legal issue in the U.S.
Sure.
So do you know about the I guess it's called many different things, but like the gay panic defense in court?
Yeah. No, it's monstrous. The idea that, and there's a newer one called trans panic defense, and the idea basically is, if I'm remembering this right, is that if you this isn't funny, but like the fact that anybody defends this, it's just so absurd. Like, suppose you went home with somebody, and it was dark, and you were, you take them, you don't check their. Again, I don't know how this would happen, but you get into bed with them. You imagine that they're a woman that has a vagina, and it turns out they have a penis, and therefore you freak out. And because of the fact that you didn't expect that coming, and like you were so taken and blindsided by it, therefore the fact that you reacted violently and seriously hurt them or killed them is maybe acceptable, right? I think that's a fair encapsulation of what's going on there. And it's horrible. I don't remember how far it dates back to, but I mean, the idea that it's appropriate to like, I mean, it would be one thing if somebody was raping you, engaging in violence and self-defense, but to say, well, I wasn't expecting this form of sexual partner, I'm permitted to engage in violence and self-defense. No, that is not legitimate at all. So insane. And I mean, sure, it would be great if everybody was, as upfront with one another as possible, but to say that you should be permitted to actively harm or even kill someone, over something like that is just. So, nevertheless, I mean, the law is a creature of circumstance in part. So, I mean, I don't know when it comes back, when this idea dated back to. It's probably pretty old, but it's certainly not legitimate now, and that's a huge infringement of the civil right of people, because you're saying basically we're not going to enforce the murder laws, the same with you, we're going to enforce them differently for you. That's so that's insane.
Yeah. I was actually surprised when I was reading about it, because I thought that was something that would have happened maybe 10, 15 years ago. But apparently there was a case just in 2018 where somebody, I mean, I think it was for a trans person. Yeah. I mean, it was.
Well, the one thing I would say is that if I was a defense attorney, I wouldn't feel like I was doing anything immoral by trying to use that defense, because ultimately your role as the defense attorney is to try and do everything you can within the bounds of the law to get your client the best result, right? So I'm not trying to slur the defense attorney, I guess, for using that, but ultimately for the, for that to be a permissible defense, something that is allowed to be brought up at all, that's ridiculous to me. So I mean, again, defense attorneys, it's easy to pick. That's no good. And folks, I see the chat is getting kind of hostile here. So if we can't dial it back a little bit on the personal attacks, we're gonna have to start, deleting messages here. So anyway, yeah. So that's the way I feel about that.
All right. So I guess this is a bit tangential to that. How do you feel about Trump's, I guess, trans military ban?
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, it just seems malicious. The justification, I think, is always like the unity of the Corps and the unity of the brigade, like fighting at the front. And again, I mean, if there was seriously an infringement on that by virtue of allowing trans people to serve, I mean, maybe there would be something there, but there never is with that argument, at least as far as I've ever heard. It's always the same argument. We can't have women, we can't have gay people, now we can't have trans people. Why? Unit cohesion. And occasionally they'll say, well, it's going to be expensive. You know what I mean? All right, I'm going to be timing somebody out here. Sorry about the interruption there.
That's fine.
But yeah, definitely folks in the chat. I mean, the whole point of what we do is that it's chill and you can discuss different ideas. You don't need to personally attack people. So, it's like, I just don't get it. I don't get the point. It seems, you could maybe say, well, it costs a lot. But again, given that what the military spends its money on, to say that this is like an issue of cost savings, I mean, this is a small part of the population. And the cost that they have, the special costs that they have, is just so, it's such a minimal issue that, I mean, the people who are like trying to serve this country, which is, and the military often has difficulty meeting its recruitment goals as it is. So to say, well, we're going to make it just a little bit harder for them, I just, so I don't, I mean, it's, I guess it's, I don't know if you could say anybody has a right to serve in the military or not. I mean, the military set its own standards for who is physically capable of joining the military, but the way that they make this decision based on, again, a group characteristic rather than an individual decision, it's just illegitimate, I think. So
all right. Okay, so did you?
And I was going to say one more thing, I guess, about trans rights. I don't. I know there is sometimes on like the immutable nature of trans issues. Like whether somebody is born that way or whether some people choose. And I guess I feel like it doesn't matter to me at all. Ultimately, it feels like to me the ability to define your own identity got to be right up there with the most important of freedoms. So even if somebody proved, and again, I'm not saying this is the case, but even if all the trans medicalists, I suppose they're called, people who say that it's either medical or it's not real. I mean, even if you could prove that like dysphoria, I'm probably tripping over myself right now in describing this, but like even if you could prove that the only people who authentically feel this are like have some kind of medical condition, it just all feels irrelevant. I mean, you should be able to choose your own identity, and that's it. Like that's the most important thing to me. And I think that overrides like any, like I think it still deserves protection, protected class status, irrespective of any kind of medical, like intrinsic immutable nature. And I think that's reasonable, just in the same way that, like religion gets special protection. I mean, that's certainly, but now somebody in the chat said, sure, you can define your identity if you don't impose it upon. And I think that's generally true. Although, the only impositions I'm talking about are the same impositions, I guess, that you have with religion, where you couldn't fire somebody because they're, you know what I mean? So on and so forth. So I think similarly, you couldn't fire somebody because of their gender identity. Couldn't fire somebody, for those reasons. So.
For sure. All right. Let's finish it off by talking a bit about Yang 2020.
Sure.
If you're up for that.
Yeah, I'm
so
down.
we went into Yang a little bit before, and he is your preferred candidate, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess when people talk about Yang, they mostly talk about UBI or automation. Those are sort of like his big points. And as I understand, you're very much pro UBI.
Yeah. It wouldn't necessarily have to be in the form that he proposes, but I think that would be I do think it would be a good idea to basically give people a form of cash that they could spend on whatever purpose they chose and saw fit, rather than to tie it to, you have to spend this much on food and this much on rent, and so on and so forth. So I think that would be great. He stacks it with a variety of other programs, but I think it probably, for example, you could never have a UBI that would replace national health care, just because it's so expensive to have universal health care that I don't think you could ever just give everybody a certain amount of cash and then just say, well, we're done, that's all we need to do. So to that extent, I think that negative income tax would be a good maybe a good alternative, but some kind of, I think that's just another form of universal income. At the end of the day, if you fall below a certain, so I think that's a good policy. He's got some other good policies. I think probably the most important one that is not often talked about is his democracy dollars idea. And that idea is to spend $100, or rather to give every American. Oh man, I've got somebody else just mentioned an important Yang policy I'm going to talk about after this. Don't read the chat. Don't read the chat. So the democracy dollars idea is every American gets $100 that they can use it or lose it to spend on a political campaign of their choice. I'm guessing this would be every 2 years, because this would be for, most of our elections, not all, but most are like biannual. Every 2 years, we have some kind of election. And so I think that would be kind of a bottom-up way of engaging campaigns. And he claims that this would wash out corporate money by a factor of like 8 to 1. Ultimately, there's no. I think there's just not really an argument for getting rid of, say, the Citizens United decision, which has allowed unlimited corporate or not unlimited, just corporate financing, unlimited financing period of political campaigns, not like candidate campaigns, but for example, unlimited financing of super PACs, like political action committees that then can use that money to promote whatever causes they see fit. The check is they're not supposed to work closely with campaigns, but they often do. Yeah. And they don't have to work. They don't have to break the law to do that. They can signals.
Super hard to check that stuff.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the First Amendment, I think, makes it very hard to limit that kind of political activity, because again, it's easy to say, like, we want to limit the activity of corporations, right, when it comes to promoting, say, fossil fuels. Okay, yeah, sure, nobody disagrees with I disagree with that, I guess, but most people would be fine with that. But on the other hand, though, you'd also have to prohibit a lot of that activity that people like to the extent somebody can raise a lot of money for some kind of cause to raise awareness for global warming or whatever. So I think it's really hard to imagine a world where we can dial back that decision, but we can kind of wash the money out with public financing of campaigns, which we already do anyway. It's just that it's not a very effective system, because to get the financing of a political campaign, at least a presidential campaign, I don't know about non-presidential campaigns, but presidential campaigns, you have to give up basically public financing. And it's a very small amount of money that you get by comparison to what you can make from privately financing it anyway. So so I think that's a really transformative idea. Something to think about there. And then his other idea that he wants to do is a form of Medicare for all as well. He hasn't defined that one particularly well, but I think the fact that he's thinking about it, to me, those are the trifecta of important policies that we need: campaign reform, universal income, universal health care. So that's what I like about Andrew Yang. He's got some policy he's jumped on the bandwagon of folks who want to rewrite Section 230 that we talked about earlier. And I think he's got that's the only bad idea that I can think of offhand that I don't like. But he's probably got some others. He's got like 120 policy plans. But to me, the important ones are the big three. The ones that I mentioned.
Yep.
So, yep.
Yeah, and I think Yang has an interesting approach. Especially, I think the democracy dollars is something that people don't really talk about. But I think it's super interesting way to sort of tackle the whole money in politics thing. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard that idea anywhere before.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised that more people aren't interested in that, because compared to, say, it's much more plausible to pay for. And again, we already do something like that with respect to public financing and presidential campaigns. It's I mean, I think that's a super that's an idea that has that has the possibility to be super transformative. Because at that point, if everybody can give away $100 to a political campaign of their choice, I mean, you really could say, all right, well, I could either appeal to a handful of large corporate donors, or I could appeal to a lot of people who will all give me their $100. And that starts to be, I think, really transformative. So.
Yeah. Okay, so you haven't talked too fondly of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
But as I understand it, at least, it seems that Yang and Bernie actually share a lot of voters.
Yes, they definitely do, in the sense that I think a lot of them, they'll second choice is the other.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how true that is with the Bernie folks. That's true for at least some of them. And then for the Yang folks, I think their second choice is almost always Bernie. Or yeah. So, I mean, Andrew Yang, one of the things that he talks about a lot that I don't really, I'm not really that sold on, is the idea that automation is coming in a very big and immediate way. I think it's going to take probably a little longer than he might suggest for most people. I do think it's coming, and I do think it is, quote unquote, different this time. Like, once a lot of brain work is automated, there's, I mean, at a certain point, there's not going to be much for humans to really do anymore. And I mean, I don't think it's 10 years from now, but I think it is probably, this century sometime. So, I mean, I think we're definitely going to see that point. And of course, it may not even matter that much. Like, if he's right that, say, 20% of the population is going to be unemployable in the nearish future, that's enough to really throw the whole system into broad and deep chaos. I mean, that's the Great Depression right there. That's the worst economic depression in the history of the United States back again. Maybe in the history of the world, as far as at least modern time. So yeah, that's going to be a big deal. But yeah, that's a big transformative narrative. And I think, Bernie Sanders has his, big transformative narrative too, about the rich and the billionaires versus the rest of us, and, so I think there's something there for sure. I mean, it's a lot more captivating, sure, than, somebody like, I guess, Elizabeth Warren, who says, I've got a plan for that, a little more of a technocratic approach. And I mean, that's not an insult to her. I'm just saying, I think it's probably it's probably a little more compelling to say transformative. But I guess at the same time, I don't know that the polls actually bear what I just set out, because Elizabeth Warren is ahead in a lot of places. And again, as much as I like Andrew Yang, he's floating around 3 or 4%.
Yeah.
So, it's I may actually be totally mistaken, but I think either way, both of them have that kind of transformative message, and that's probably an overlap. I guess it's a different kind of transformative message for sure. But it's
in some ways, I guess I can see sort of the appeal to the same, I guess, type of voter. In most cases, I think Yang has a lot of the super technocratic voters that Bernie doesn't necessarily have, but I think they share a lot of like middle class, maybe something around there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is both of them from what I've heard seem to definitely appeal more in that set. I know both of them seem to have difficulty with especially with black voters. Like I saw in South Carolina, for example, Joe Biden is at, I think, 43% among black voters, and the top candidate after him was like just about 10%. So yeah, I know they both are having traction or having difficulty developing some traction, with the African American community. But on the whole, I do think they have some things in common. I think that a lot of Bernie Sanders' ideas are really bad. Um, in particular, three of them, I think his idea of a federal jobs guarantee is something that certainly has the best of intentions, but which I think would lead to kind of a creeping nationalization of the economy, and which I think under the hands of the wrong president would be absolutely destructive. Like if we had a federal jobs guarantee now, President Trump would be building that right now, absolutely without a doubt, and it would be who knows what kind of interest things he'd put his national labor force up to, building statues to glorify, for whatever, who knows. Probably not that far on the nose, but something similarly nonsensical. So there's that. I also think that these jobs, they're often portrayed as a kind of flexible reserve labor force. I don't see the flexibility in it. I think it will be very different. I think it'll be easy to dial the federal jobs guarantee up, but I think it'll be very difficult to dial it because, again, that would be, hirings and firings. Firings are harder to do than hirings, especially for government. Of course, they would say that ultimately designed, that's fine, but I think it's a lot more dangerous than, say, giving people, a UBI cash payment. So there's that. I think his idea for a kind of a national form of rent control is also really dangerous because rent control chiefly drives housing shortages. It's good if you've already got, your housing and you already have your unit that you plan to stay in forever. It helps you, but it doesn't resolve housing shortages, and it seems to exacerbate them. So that's another problem. And then the third idea that I don't like is his most recent one, to take 20% of corporate equity and give it to workers, I think 2% a year at a time. And he, I believe, plans to do this by taking 2%, I think, per year, up to 20%. And this would be done by like the creation of new stock, but ultimately it would water down the value of stock, and it seems basically like a property grab without compensation. So I don't like it. So I don't like those policies.
That's fine.
But I mean, I'm still going to vote for him over Donald Trump because Donald Trump is a lot worse.
For sure.
So. And sorry, folks, about the audio, but
yeah.
It's just kind of patchy right now.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. I mean, it's definitely been super interesting. So
yeah, definitely.
I guess as a final question, do you have any hidden gems for people that they should watch apart from yourself, obviously?
Sure. I like let's see. So like people on Twitch.
Yeah, or I guess YouTube as well.
Okay. Yeah. So as far as people on Twitch go, people should definitely check out Rage Pope, who just rated me with 7 views. Thanks for the raid, Rage Pope. It's good to have you guys here. So definitely check out Rage Pope. That's one piece of advice. Not sure what Rage Pope's content is, but I'm gonna roll the dice and say it's good stuff, and you definitely check it out. So that's one. Beyond that, let's see. I like the fellow who set us up, Irrelevant. That's AH Relevant. Relevant. He's a good guy. Definitely worth checking stuff out on Twitch. And if you want the conservative legal perspective, you should definitely check out Lecture Fan, spelled LCTRFAN, Lecture Fan. So that's pretty good. And yeah, lots of good streamers out there. I mean, I could keep on going. I'm going to be on the Big Brain podcast tomorrow, and that will be with a streamer, by the name of Mindwaves TV. He does a lot of good stuff. He's been running a real good political podcast, so definitely check Mindwaves TV out. And I could just go on and on. But that's a few folks to check out with on Twitch, and with Mindwaves you can see a bunch of streamers that are I think good stuff. Like you could see some streamers I've been working with lately: Denims, Pixie, fellow who I think I'm going to be talking to at some point soon by the name of Rem. Hark Dan, the landlord. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. I definitely enjoy his stuff, and we agree on a lot, although we don't agree. So yeah, lots of good folks to check out. Yeah. So, and then on YouTube, I really like Knowing Better. Knowing Better makes some good videos. I like a channel by the name of Kurzgesatz. So that's pretty good stuff. And I'm trying to think of some other channels that I regularly watch. Yeah, I don't know. We were talking about Milton Friedman earlier. I like Free to Choose. That's his like series that he made in the 80s. It's all on YouTube. It's not perfect. I don't agree, but I think I agree with a lot of it, and I think it's really worth considering as far as an individual freedom argument goes. So I think that's a lot of good stuff. I feel like I'm missing some big ones there, but I don't know. I like ContraPoints on YouTube too. So definitely, if anybody hasn't heard of ContraPoints yet, I doubt that's the case, but definitely check out ContraPoints. So yeah, lots of good streamers though out there, and lots of good folks on YouTube. And of course, I mean, I started streaming because I started watching Destiny on Twitch, and after I watched some of that, I got the sense of, hey, maybe I could do that. So Destiny was great to kind of just as far as I've heard, he kind of cleared out a little bit of space for people on Twitch to talk about politics in the first place. So yeah,
definitely.
So, lots of folks out there to check out. But that's my short.
Right, and where can people find you? Like, what are all your platforms?
Yeah. Well, they can find me on. All right, so the only place I really make so far is Twitch. So that's twitch.tv/BASTIAT. I'm named after Friedrich Bastiat here, a French Economist who is famous for all kinds of good writing, specifically the I think it was called "What is Seen versus Unseen," kind of dismantling the broken windows theory of economics, where, hey, you break a window, you've basically created work for somebody, so you've added to the society's prosperity. And he dismantles that pretty artfully. So it's that's pretty good. Yeah, so you can find me on twitch.tv/Bastiat, BASTIAT. Also on Twitter, twitter.com/everydaybastiat. And we have a Discord server, and you can get a link to that on our Twitch page. So eventually we'll do something on YouTube. I just have been trying to get established here on Twitch first.
All right. Well, thanks a ton.
Yeah.
It was super interesting, and I hope people will check you out.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. It was fun talking with you. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I really enjoyed the conversation. So it was a lot of fun.
Likewise.
And